You've been offered a contract to publish your board game, but is it worth your while? How much money will you receive and how often? I'm Adam Porter. I'm a board game designer from Wales, and in this series of short videos I'm taking a look at licensing contracts between designers and publishers. If you're finding these game design videos helpful, please share them with other designers and don't forget to subscribe. And I'll preface this video as normal by clarifying that I'm not a lawyer. I have no expertise in contract law, but I have signed a dozen or so board game contracts and I've rejected a few more. So I've got a bit of a feel for what they tend to contain and things to look out for. That said, if you have any queries or concerns about a contract which has been proposed, please do get appropriate legal advice before signing. Don't blindly follow my advice. So I've selected a few short passages from contracts that I've seen and I'm going to share them with you. In this video, I'm specifically focusing on royalties, advances, and access to complimentary or discounted copies of your game. The publisher will pay the author royalties of 6% of the net selling price. This is probably the most common arrangement, though the percentage may vary. Basically, the designer receives a small payment for each game sold, and it is a small payment. Remember, the selling price will be considerably lower for a small game than it is for a large one. In most cases, the publisher will pay these royalties based on the price of the game when they sell it to a distributor. Remember, this is far, far lower than the price the game is sold at in a shop. If a retailer is selling the game at £30, they're probably buying it from the distributor for £15. Perhaps the publisher sold it to the distributor for £10. You're going to receive 6% of £10, i.e. 60 pence per game sold. That percentage is negotiable, but new designers will commonly be offered around 5%. If they're very keen on your game concept and you have a proven track record, or perhaps there are other companies interested, you may be able to negotiate a higher percentage. 7 or 8% doesn't seem unrealistic. It's also worth remembering that if you've co-designed your game, you're going to have to split this royalty equally among the various designers, in which case it doesn't hurt to ask for a slightly higher percentage. If you don't ask, you don't get. But it's also worth remembering that the publisher may need to adjust the percentage according to their own expenses. If they have high costs because your design demands extensive artwork, and especially if there's an intellectual property attached to the game, Star Trek, Stranger Things, My Little Pony, etc., then the percentage offered to the designer might be reduced accordingly. The author shall be paid 3% of the retail selling price before taxes. The royalties shall be calculated based on the manufacturer's suggested retail price. Author shall be paid 7% of publisher's revenue if the manufacturer's suggested retail price is unknown or unavailable. This is an example to show how some contracts deviate a little from the norm. In this instance, the offer is 3% of the recommended retail price. Remember, the recommended price is often a little higher than the stores actually sell it for, so that £30 game might actually have a recommended price of £35. 3% sounds low, but 3% of £35 is £1.05 per game sold, and that's much better than the 6% of net selling price in our previous example. The publisher shall pay to the author a royalty of 7% of the manufacturing cost of each copy of the product. Well, this is an even bigger deviation from the norm. Manufacturing cost can be very low. Perhaps that £30 game only costs £5 to manufacture, so your payment will be 7% of £5, or 35 pence per game. Rubbish deal, right? Well, not so hasty. The benefit in this deal was that the royalty payments were made immediately after every print run. This meant that the payment was guaranteed and not dependent on sales. Much more security and much more frequent income rather than waiting for 6 months or, more commonly, annual royalties. The other issue to watch out for here is that with increasing quantities, manufacturing costs reduce. So the more successful your game is, the bigger the print runs and the lower your royalty payment. In this specific instance, I requested that a minimum royalty payment per unit should be written into the contract, and the publisher was happy to oblige. Kickstarter has thrown up a world of complications, with financial models for crowd-funded games varying wildly. In many instances, it's simplest to opt for a percentage of net profit, but this does call for some careful accounting. I briefly mentioned that royalties are paid 6 monthly or more commonly annually. I have heard of quarterly payments, but my personal experience is that most publishers stick to the once per year approach. In many instances, your game will not hit the market until 2 to 3 years after you sign the contract, and you'll have to wait another year to receive royalties. That is a long wait to see any income from your game, and that's where advance payments come in. The publisher shall pay the author a non-refundable advance against royalties as follows: €2,000 upon execution of this agreement. An advance is paid upon signing the contract. It's an indication of the publisher's genuine intent to produce your game. In several instances, publishers have terminated my contract with them without ever producing the game. This is always a possibility, and it's deeply disappointing, but it's easier to accept if you've previously received an advance payment. An advance of €2,000 would be on the higher end, though I know some companies offer significantly more. Many advances seem to be around the €500 or $500 mark. This money is then taken off your first royalty payment. This is an important point. An advance is different to a bonus. A bonus payment would be additional to any royalties due on sales. An advance is deducted from your future payments. If the game is never published though, or if it sells very poorly, in most instances you don't have to give that advance back. It's worth checking the wording here though to make sure that is indeed the case before you sign the contract. In my example, the publisher offered a non-refundable advance, which is what we're really looking for. Sadly, many publishers do not offer advance payments, although they are pretty commonplace. I would always politely push for an advance, and if the publisher refused, I would think very carefully about the benefits of proceeding with this publisher versus declining the licensing deal and moving on. In reality, there is often only one offer on the table, so the designer is not particularly empowered to negotiate here. I do know designers who have managed to negotiate bespoke royalty arrangements, often an escalating percentage as the game's sales increase. So for example, a designer might receive 5% for the first 10,000 copies sold, increasing to 7% thereafter, and 8% if the game sells 100,000 copies or more. There is the possibility that a publisher will sub-license your game to another company, usually in another part of the world, giving them the opportunity to manufacture and promote the game, while your publisher themselves receives royalties. Your contract ought to address this, though it is sometimes overlooked. For all sub-licensing rights granted by publisher to third parties, author shall be paid 35% of the sale price before taxes. This would be a common agreement. Essentially, you're taking a 35% cut of the royalties received by the publisher. You also need to consider how you're going to be paid if the publisher releases a digital copy of your game. This is often not included in contracts, and I think it's increasingly important. Often, publishers will release a free version of your game on one of the online gaming platforms. How are you going to be recompensed for this? Maybe it isn't necessary because it's advertising your game and driving sales of physical copies. But what if your game is between print runs? At that point, the game is available for free and you're receiving nothing. I think this should be discussed at the very least in every contract negotiation, and in many cases I think a specific clause should be included in the contract. Of course, an alternative arrangement to all of this would be to simply receive a one-off payment for your work on the game and thereafter hand off ownership of the concept altogether. This is not a particularly common arrangement, though not unheard of, and it has pros and cons. The first benefit is that your payment is guaranteed. It is not dependent on sales. And secondly, you may be able to negotiate quite a high figure because of the finality of the arrangement. Once this is paid, you will never see another penny, so it better be worth your while. With many games bringing in very little income under traditional royalty arrangements, this could be quite attractive as a safe option. The downside, of course, is that you don't benefit if the game really takes off and becomes a bestseller. Finally, as designer, you will receive complimentary copies of your game. To the author, free of charge, 6 units. The author shall be charged for additional units at a 60% discounted retail price before taxes. The offer varies wildly. I have read reports of most publishers offering between 10 and 20 free copies. My experience is at the lower end of that. I know designers who will look at the number in the contract and routinely request that the publisher doubles it. I'm not so bold, but I do know that I ideally want around 14 copies as a minimum. Once I've given copies to my close family, handed copies to local board game cafes or reviewers, and a few interested gaming friends and important playtesters, it doesn't leave many left over. Upon publication of my first board game, a novelist friend told me that no matter how excited I was, never to give away all my complimentary copies. He said there will always come a time that you need a spare copy to share with somebody or other in the professional sphere, and you'll be kicking yourself if you don't have any left. And I think he's right. Most contracts will allow you to purchase additional copies at a discounted price, but the extent of the discount is very variable, and often there are stipulations about what you can do with those copies. Finally, most contracts will allocate you at least one free copy of each new edition of your game and each foreign edition. In reality, I reckon this is often overlooked by publishers. I've known many designers having to chase publishers to get their foreign editions, and to be fair to the publisher, they may not have had copies themselves of a game which is being distributed at the other side of the world. It's really gratifying to receive foreign language editions of your games, but honestly, I don't know what I'm going to do with my stack of foreign editions of Doodle Rush, none of which I can actually play. So now you know how you're going to be paid and what sort of percentages we're talking about. But if you take the deal, how much creative control are you giving up? Can you still direct the development of your game? Click on the link to find out.